Oh, now I'm going to be funny. Do I have to be funny? Oh, I don't know how I'm going to... Oh, here we go. I promise I won't plug my book too much, which is on sale here. Yeah, $16.99. This has been my life for the last sort of couple of years, really. I work across all different areas of science, as Colleen just mentioned. But the last few years, my life has been spent working with and talking about spaceflight, particularly human spaceflight, which is something that I think we're all kind of, particularly as kids, we get really, really interested in, and it's something that has always fascinated me. And it's really nice to be here as well, actually just coming off the back of Bill's talk about the importance of technicians and actually thinking about what the role of the astronaut now is in space. And that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. Just off the, if you're planning, anyone planning on leaving the planet today or soon? Hands up if you're interested in being an astronaut. If someone came up to you today and said, NASA would like you to be an astronaut, hands up if you would go. I'm interested in about half. Well, actually, hands up if you absolutely no way on God's earth am I going into space. It's about 50-50. Yeah. I always wanted to be an astronaut, and then I actually realized what an astronaut does, and I'm like, no. Okay, well, let's just go through some of the numbers. So if you wanted to leave planet Earth, that is planet Earth there. So numbers. Population of planet Earth as of today, as of the train journey up last night on the website, the World Thingy website. Over 7.5 billion, which is an extraordinary number. When I was born, it was half that. There's now twice as many people living on spaceship Earth there as there was when I was born a long time ago. Population in space as of today, as of the train journey up to Nottingham from London, is 6. Talking about apps earlier on, if you want to know how many people there are in space, there's a wonderful app you can get. It's called How Many People Are There in Space Right Now? And I don't know if you can see it. I should have done this before. How many people are in space right now? And it's thinking, and the answer is 6. There you go. The answer is nearly always 6. Occasionally it's 3, and when they're doing kind of crew swap over, sometimes it'll be 3, but normally it's 6. Occasionally, last year it actually got up to 9. There was the Chinese had their own space station as well, different from the International Space Station. So I think we were up to 9 at one point, but that's your pretty standard number. This is an interesting one. Total number of people who have left the planet. What do you think? So since Gagarin, when was that, 1961, how many people do you think have actually gone into space? And by space, I mean anything above 100 kilometers, which is the Kármán line. This is the international demarcation line of space, named after the physicist Theodor von Kármán. Give me a number. What do you think? 300? 500? 60? We'll do the sort of wisdom of the crowd, somewhere between 60 and 1 and 500. Any advance on that? Yeah, happy with that? The answer is, as of today, as of last week, when there was another crew launch, 553. There you go, very good. 553 people in the history of humanity have actually gone higher than 100 kilometers. Which begs the question, reasons to leave the planet. As I was on the train to Nottingham yesterday from London, wondering why anyone would want to leave the planet, this is what I came up with. There are the obvious things, you know, catastrophic climate change, that sort of thing, that might happen. Maybe the talks. When is this? June the 12th. I hear it, is it June the 12th, Trump talking to Kim Jong-un? Maybe it all goes horribly wrong and Trump says something terrible, and that happens. That could be a very good reason to leave the planet. Maybe the Brexit negotiations just go really bad. I mean, you know, worse than they're going at the moment. That would be a good reason to leave the planet. Basically, on the train on the way to Northampton, I just had a good time Googling. Google imaging terrible things. Alien abduction, that's always the favourite reason why we might have to leave. We may be invaded by some sort of alien race like that. Oh, my actual slides have been cut off. You can't actually see the top. Is there a way we can actually, because there's text at the top of that. I'll read it to you. The question, which has been cut off by the projector, is, do you have the right stuff? When we talk about going into space, when we talk about being an astronaut, of course, we think about the famous Tom Wolfe book, the famous Tom Wolfe saying, which is the right stuff, this idea of the quality that somebody must have, or what would that quality be? And of course, this was a phrase that was coined in the 1950s amongst the American test pilot fraternity that went on to become Project Mercury, that first group of 7 astronauts who, in America at least, went on to leave the planet. But we've been thinking about this for a long time. This is actually a picture from Disneyland in the 1960s. There was a doctor who worked with Walt Disney. Walt Disney was absolutely obsessed by this idea of leaving the planet, and worked with Dr. Werner von Braun, the German rocket scientist, to really popularize this idea of space. And this was Dr. Heinz Hoffmann's picture of a new species which he called Homo sapiens extraterrestrialis. This idea that anyone who would actually leave the planet would become a separate species. So this was one of the very first pictures taken at Disneyland of Heinz Hoffmann's new species. But I went back even further because I was interested in what kind of people would want to leave the planet. And forget about the 1950s. I went all the way back to the 1600s. There was a book by Johannes Kepler, the physicist, called Somnium, a novel he wrote, a sort of early proto-science fiction novel, in which he describes what the qualities that an astronaut would have to have if he left the planet. So this is from 1608, and I've written it down for you. I'll read it to you. So this is Kepler. You know Kepler. You know, the great physicist of the entire European scientific revolution we owe so much. But this is what he said about people leaving the planet. We do not admit desk-bound humans into these ranks, nor the fat, nor the foppish. But we choose those who regularly spend their time hunting with swift horses, or those who voyage in ships to the Indies and are accustomed to living on hard bread, garlic, dried fish, and other abhorrent foods. The best adapted for the journey are dried-out old women. Since from youth they are accustomed to riding goats at night, or pitchforks, or travelling the wide expanses of the earth in worn-out clothes. There are none in Germany who are suitable, but the dry bodies of Spaniards are not rejected. So that was Kepler. This was the 1600s. This is, you know, thinking about the night sky and what may be out there. But things have moved on a little bit since then, as you can imagine. I've got a slide. I hope all the text is going to fit on your screen, because unfortunately it's sort of cutting off the tops and the bottom. This is the question I thought, and because you're all a smart bunch, because I know there's a lot of scientists and such in the room, I thought I'd ask you this question. Are you an astronaut? I was just curious to see amongst you who would have the basic qualifications to go into space. So my friend at the Johnson Space Centre emailed me yesterday on the train on the way up to Nottingham the current application form to be an astronaut. So if you'd all stand up now, we'll have the house lights on. I'm going to see if there's who amongst you in your ranks, none of you whom are fat or foppish or dried out, would be an astronaut. Okay, so question 1, sit down if this is not you, and we'll see who's the last person standing. Sit down if you don't have a bachelor's degree in engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, or mathematics. There's going to be a lot of you standing up still. See, I actually did this in a primary school the other day, and they were all but I know, blimey, oh God, you guys really are a smart bunch. Okay, so you've all got degrees. This is, I have imposter syndrome again. Next question. At least 3 years of related, progressively responsible professional experience. I don't quite know what that means. Basically, do you have a job? Or at least 1,000 hours of pilot in-command time in a jet aircraft. Have you had a job for 3 years, or can you fly a plane? Yeah? Good. Okay, we're all good. Okay, we're good. Okay, it's going to get a bit tougher now. Distant, and this is your eyes. 20/20 in each eye, or, don't panic, don't panic, Mr. Mannering. These days you can have it corrected. If you have astigmatism or whatever it is in your eyes, if you can have it laser corrected, these days they allow astronauts to wear glasses, so it has to be correctable. Man, you know, the Soyuz only has 3 seats, and I feel we may have rather too many astronauts. Blood pressure, not exceeding 140/90. Basically, are you fit? There's a couple of people sitting down. I like the way Bill's still standing up. Bill's desperate. He's going to be there. He'll be in the middle seat. Heights between... This is American, I apologize. I know you get very cross about such inches. I know I get into terrible trouble on telly if you talk about things being the size of whales or Olympic symbols. What is that? That's like 5... Bill, what's that? Between like 5'2" and 6'1"? 6'3". Okay, so if you're between 5'1" and 6'3", which is basically everyone, unless you're tiny or giant. Okay, official scuba qualification. You will need... We've lost Bill, ladies and gentlemen. We've lost Bill. How many have you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. Let's see if we can whittle it down to... Actually, crumbs, blimey, if the shuttle was still going, you could all go, because that seats 7. Official scuba qualification. You will need, even if it's your paddy open water. Is that what you've got? Yes, everyone's got it. Did you go to somewhere nice, like Bali, to do that? Egypt, exactly. I did mine at Heathrow. Heathrow Airport, I did mine. There's like an old pit lake. Can you swim 3 lengths of a 25-metre pool without stopping? Yes, of course you can. And then another 3 lengths of the pool in a flight suit. Wait, so do you have to put the flight suit on? How does that work? I don't know. And then you've got to tread water continuously whilst wearing the flight suit. Okay, this is the... Oh, crumbs, I hope we're not going to get cut off at the bottom. That's the killer. What? This is the killer technical... Has everyone sat down? Do we not have any Russian speakers? You can tell us what that says. Yes, exactly. Do you speak Russian? Exactly right. And you can speak Russian, but you can't tread water. Is that right? Or whatever. Anyway. Yeah, speaking Russian, if you are going into space as of today, you will need to be, well, if not fluent in Russian, certainly technically fluent in Russian. Of course, the only way to go into space at the moment is on the Soyuz rocket, which is a Russian-built rocket, as you know. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Soyuz in a moment. I'm sorry, we've got no astronauts in today. Normally we have 1 or 2. Never mind. If you did want to be an astronaut, I'm not going to go too much into the training, apart from this is my very favourite bit of astronaut training. This is real astronaut training. The Japanese space agency, JAXA, have a very specific training exercises they do, which I love, which is they take their astronaut candidates and they will lock them up in solitary confinement for 3 days. And during that 3 days of being on their own in isolation, and they're being monitored, all kinds of things, they are asked to make 1,000 origami paper cranes, which is actually a lot. If you think about how long it takes to make an origami paper crane, if you're good, you might be able to do it in a minute or so. But actually, having to do 1,000 paper cranes in that amount of time is a tough challenge. Once those cranes are made, after the 3 days, the astronauts are taken out, and those 1,000 paper cranes are strung up on a string in a line, and the psychologist, or the physician, the astronaut trainers will look at crane number 1 and look to see the quality of craftsmanship, how well it's made, and they will work their way along the line, looking for deviations in quality, deviations that might show stress or rushing or spending too much time or whatever it is. And you can learn a lot about the human character and how a human being works under pressure by looking at origami. Can anyone make an origami crane? Is anyone good at making origami? Come down. I'm going to give you, look. I tell you what, come down here, make us a beautiful crane, and if you make a beautiful crane and I deem it worthy, then you will win, I kid you not, the chance to go into space. Oh. What's your name? Jane. Jing. Okay, it's got to be. You can do it at your seat. You don't have to do it. Oh, you can come and sit on my sofa if you want. I don't quite know why we have a sofa on stage. You can do it there. So Jing is going to make a beautiful paper crane to demonstrate, and she might win a wonderful prize. Okay, so that's a little bit about astronauts. How did you get into space? What happened? You can go back wherever. How did you go into space? Just going back to Johannes Kepler, going back to the 1600s, this is my favourite space method. This was, again, from the early 1600s, Bishop Francis Goodwin, who was an English bishop, who was obsessed by the new European scientific revolution that was going on at that time, Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, etc. He wrote a proto-science fiction story. Again, this is called The Man in the Moon. Anyone who's read James and the Giant Peach will kind of get the general gist. He imagined a special breed of goose, which he called the ganser. These goose that he imagined would migrate between the Earth and the Moon. And he reasoned thus, if you could somehow attach wires or strings to the feet of these geese and construct a little chair, then you could, in theory, travel between the Earth and the Moon. And it's a story that's worth reading. Anyone who's interested in the history of science should read it, because on this kind of proto-lunar voyage, there are all kinds of discussions about the science of the day, about gravity and about extraterrestrial life and all that kind of thing. So this is one of the very, very early examples of our obsession with space travel. This is one, of course, you'll all recognize, Le Voyage dans la Lune, Jules Verne's story from the 1800s. This particular story, this is the poster from a film, Georges Méliès film, which is one of the very first, not just first science fiction films, but very first films ever made at the beginning of the 20th century. This idea of having a gun on Earth and a projectile that you could somehow fire people, you could put people inside the projectile and fire them at the moon. And this particular story, oh, I've actually got a rather nice slide. This is a little still from the film, and you can see the gun here, this wonderful gun, pointing at the moon. I'm not quite sure what they're doing at the bottom and why they're wearing kind of swimming costumes. It's been a while since I saw the film, but anyway, there you go. I think it's rather lovely. But this particular story by Jules Verne was absolutely instrumental in the development and the history of rocket science, particularly these sort of gentlemen here, all of whom were familiar with Jules Verne's story, all of whom were obsessed by it to the point where they had memorized it almost line for line. Number one there, Tsiolkovsky, was a Russian mathematician, and he actually did the maths trying to work out, would it be possible to actually fire somebody from the Earth to the moon? What kind of forces would be involved? And realized, of course, it would be absolutely impossible, and came up with a notion of rockets, the idea of the reaction engine that we use today. And of course, number three, we're going to talk a little bit about in the moment, Sergei Korolev, the Russian engineer who went on to develop the R-7 and the Soyuz, through to five, Dr. Werner von Braun, who did so much to popularize space, and of course, developed the Saturn V that actually did take us to the moon. Number three, where's my Russian speaker? How do you pronounce his name? Sergei Korolev, is that right? Say it again. Korolev. Korolev. I had this terrible, I went with Tim Peake for his launch a few years ago, and this was my Russian fixer. I had to do a live piece to camera talking about the history of Soyuz, of Korolev, and I can't pronounce his name, but my Russian fixer will help you. Korolev.
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 Good.
Yeah.
Korolev.
He's revered. This man is revered in engineering circles in Russia. But those gentlemen who went on to develop rockets, who we owe so much, of course, they realized that actually firing people from a gun isn't going to work. I did this with my kids the other day. I did this at a school, but I thought I might show you how to build a rocket with things you might find lying around your house. So those of you who've got kids, this is my go-to rocket demonstration. This is how to demonstrate Newtonian physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, using things you have lying around your house. But actually, because we're at a laboratory supply solution, you'll probably be able to do this a bit better. Does everyone know what this is? Yeah, for those of you who are really old like me, film canisters, they're little 35mm film canisters, which you can't get anymore, and they make really, really good rockets. If you go into your house, if you open the front door of your house, and then you know that table to the right that's got the phone on, yeah, there's a drawer there. Open that drawer, and inside that drawer you will find some old keys that you don't know what they're for anymore, and some pens that don't work, and right at the back there will be one of those. Inside one of those there will be some film that has been exposed, and you're still in that, do I take it to Boots to get it developed? Do I chuck it away? Anyway, it makes a really, really good rocket. I'm going to demonstrate what it was that Robert Goddard and von Braun and Tsiolkovsky and Hermann Oberth all discovered. was that to build a rocket, you just need some good old-fashioned physics. You need a canister, something like that. Makes a really, really good rocket. And you need some fuel. The fuel I'm going to use today for your rocket demonstration is some water. That's all you need. You need some water. And one of these, this is an Alka-Seltzer tablet. You will find these in your bathroom cabinet. And of course, when I put the Alka-Seltzer tablet into the water, it's going to fizz. It's going to give off a gas. It's going to give off some carbon dioxide. It's going to fizz. And if I put the lid on and clip it shut, that gas is going to build up and it's going to make pressure. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a countdown from 10 to 0. My kids love this. Ready? 10. Ooh. There you go. And that's all a rocket is. That's all Dr. Werner von Braun, Robert Goddard, Hermann Oberth, etc. did. They invented a reaction engine, this idea of you have hot exhaust gases coming out one way and the rocket goes the other way. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in real life. This is actually a little clip. I do a show with Brian Cox called Stargazing Live, and this was live the day before Tim Peake's launch, just showing you around the Soyuz close-up, just so you can see what a marvelous piece of engineering it is.
It's Saturday, December 12th, and getting its final checks on the production line today is the rocket that will launch Tim into space, Soyuz TMA-19M.
What makes that so extraordinary is not just that it ferries people into space, but that it does it on such a regular basis. It is so reliable, so elegantly designed that other rockets have come and gone over the years, but Soyuz keeps on going.
This is the 128th Soyuz flight. They make a new one for every mission. Building this way is relatively cheap and efficient, unlike the space shuttle that required costly maintenance after every trip.
So this is the real muscle. This is the business end, the stage 1 boosters and the stage 2 central core, which all fire and lift off, just like a sprinter leaving the blocks to give you maximum power right at the beginning.
When Sergei Korolev first envisioned this over half a century ago, he had no idea that his design would become the workhorse of space travel.
But essentially, it is the same 1950s design as the R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile that went on to launch Sputnik and the first people in space. Simple engineering that has stood the test of time.
The next day, Tim's rocket is ready to roll.
It's 6:30 in the morning, it's bitterly cold. They've just opened the doors of the vehicle assembly hangar and they've backed in this diesel engine which they're going to attach to the Soyuz rocket itself, and then they're going to drag it out on its journey down that way towards the launch pad. Here she comes. What a glorious sight! Soyuz, Queen of the Skies. That is proper engineering.
2 hours later, it arrives here at the historic Gagarin Start launch pad.
So look at this, the train is now moving away, leaving the rocket there, and it's about to go up into its vertical position. When you're sending, I'm going to pause it there. Actually, forget about the engineering of Soyuz for a second. My favorite bit of the whole process, you have all these technicians who pull the rocket out and bolt it together. But, just a few hours before launch, that whole launch pad becomes an altar. So much of Russian spaceflight is wrapped up in their cultural world and religion. So the fact is you have a priest who blesses the rocket with holy water. And we all joke, that makes it go a bit faster, the holy water, extra fuel. And then, of course, all the press who are gathered around also get blessed. It becomes this kind of communion. I think we think of spaceflight as being shiny and silver spacesuits and what have you, but it's still so much wrapped up in our own superstitions and our beliefs and our history as well. It's a wonderful thing. Soyuz isn't going to be around much longer, I don't think, in terms of taking people up to the space station. There are new rockets coming online. Just very quickly, this is This is a little graphic of every single vehicle that has taken human beings into space. So, where was that nice pointer you had, Bill? Anyway, right on the far left there, Vostok 1, that was the rocket that took Gagarin. You can see how similar that is to the modern Soyuz. It's almost exactly the same launch vehicle. The Vostok, of course, was designed to launch, and that took Sputnik and Laika and Yuri Gagarin, was actually designed to launch a nuclear warhead from the Soviet Union onto American soil. And then we can work our way through. You've got the X-15, that space plane that was dropped from a B-52, all the way through to the Saturn V and the space shuttle. And there we are right now, Soyuz and the Chinese Long March. If you're planning to go into space the next few years, you'll know about all of these. Of course, we've got the SpaceX Falcon Heavy. That might be taking you up to space with the Dragon capsule you can see there. SLS, not the scientific laboratory supplies, but the Space Launch System, which is the NASA method, which is coming online very soon. This kind of mini space shuttle down here, this is the Sierra Nevada Dreamcatcher, it's called. Which gets launched on a rocket rather than being dropped from a carrier plane. So there's a variety of new ways that we're going to be getting into space. The Soyuz, as the only bus into space, will be joined by other buses. How are we doing with the crane? Is it looking good? Where's Ying gone? She's vanished. I can't see. Oh, is it done? No, keep, we're going to get it perfect. Buying your way into space. Hands up if you're very, very rich. Because you're all technicians, so you're all loaded, obviously. If you wanted to buy your way into space, the next couple of years is looking good. So, of course, you'll know about this. Virgin Galactic, currently at $250,000 a pop. But I know for a fact that that price is going up. So if you want to buy a ticket on Virgin, you want to book now. Just a little word about this, a bit like the X-15. This is a rocket plane, and there it is. It's actually dropped from a carrier aircraft, and then it shoots up over the Kármán line, our 100-kilometer line. We're not going to go orbital in this, so basically you're doing a big parabolic arc, okay? And when you're on top of that arc, of course, the apex, that's when you experience weightlessness. You'll have a few minutes of weightlessness before gliding down to Earth and landing like an aeroplane. If you do that, I brought this along. This is actually one of only several made. This is the official pin that any British astronaut gets if you go into space. It's a little kind of solid silver pin with a little Union Jack. So there's only a few of these have been handed out. Tim Peake, Helen Sharman, obviously, Piers Sellers, and other British astronauts have one of those. You can come and have a look at that later on. You'll get one of those. And presumably Richard Branson at the bottom kind of selling you something, maybe. So that's the Virgin one, 250,000. This is the other one, Blue Origin. If you fancy a slightly different ride into space, this will soon to be going. This is Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, his company. And rather than having a space plane zapping you up and then gliding back down, this is a capsule on the top, which after the rocket blasts off, that capsule separates and again does that parabolic trajectory, and then you gently parachute back down to Earth, rather like the old Apollo capsules, or indeed the Soyuz capsule. It's one of those things, I think people, certainly talking to kids about going to space, this idea of weightlessness. Of course, there's almost as much gravity on the International Space Station as there is on Earth. It's not that far away, the International Space Station. It's only, 400 kilometers or something like that. It is, of course, you're weightless because you are falling. So it is that constant falling that means you're weightless rather than a sort of lack of gravity as such. This is the idea of space tourism is one that goes back a long way. So this is from 50 years ago. This was Pan Am. Those of you who are old enough to remember Pan Am, the American airline, they, on the back of the first Apollo flights to the moon, so not Apollo 11, but Apollo 8, which was 50 years ago this year, they sort of capitalized on that moon fever and developed what is the very, very first loyalty card. Pan Am reasoned that sometime in the future they would be building spacecraft, and they set up this Moon Flights Club where you could call Pan Am, put your name down on the list, so when that time came when a rocket would be built, you would be first up there. And this is an original card of the Pan Am first Moon Flights Club. Of course, the other 50th anniversary is the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, that film that has inspired so many astronauts. And those of you who know that film will remember that opening sequence after the monolith and the monkeys and etc. Of the space taxi, which of course was a Pan Am taxi that took people from the Earth to the moon. That was 50 years ago this year. So there you go, the first Moon Flights Club. What to eat and what to pack. If you're planning on going to space, depends how long you're going for. The early days of space travel, of course, even if you were going to the moon is only 3 days away. 3 days there, 3 days back. Call it 3 days on the moon, perhaps, for those later J Apollo missions. You're not in space for that long, you know. It's only like a couple of week camping trip. It's not that bad. So these sorts of early food, these sort of toothpaste foods were the order of the day. They were designed very much to keep you alive rather than anything else. A little note, I came across this. This was John Young, who sadly passed away this year. He was let me just get this right, the Apollo 14 commander, but also flew on the Gemini project beforehand. And of course, the Gemini project in the 1960s, trying to develop some of the technology, thinking about longer space duration. 2 days before his Gemini flight with Gus Grissom, he went into Wolfie's Diner in Cocoa Beach in Florida and bought that sandwich. That is a corned beef sandwich. And he put it in the leg pocket of his spacesuit and forgot about it. And then went up into space, and then suddenly they were a bit peckish. He was like, oh, I've got a sandwich in my pocket. And they pulled out this corned beef sandwich, and NASA went crazy because, of course, you don't really need a corned beef sandwich in space. Nobody knew what would happen. Of course, the bread started to crumb, and they were worried that some of the particles would affect the technical aspects of the spacecraft. So the sandwich was hurriedly put back into John Young's leg pocket. However, it is still there. If you go to the Gus Grissom Museum in Indiana, it is forever preserved in a big lump of plastic. So you can go and look at Gus Grissom's stuff. It just makes me really happy that that exists. There you go. The what, sorry?
It has travelled.
It has travelled, yeah, that has travelled on, so that's been in orbit, that particular sandwich, and it's still there. It's still, well, it looks pretty good. I mean, that picture, I took a while, in fact, my picture is the whole story of that is in the book, complete with a transcript, which I recommend you read. Priced $16.99. I'm not going to. We'll get onto the hard sell in a minute. The space sandwich. This is a nice picture. This is Peggy Whitson. Peggy Whitson, record-breaking American astronaut. This is how they've solved the space sandwich dilemma. Of course, now they use tortilla. They realise that actual tortilla is really good because it works as a kind of structural base for holding things together, and it doesn't make crumbs. Or anything like this. Here's Tim and Heston Blumenthal. The thing is about food nowadays, you're not just going into space for a couple of weeks, you're going into space for 6 months or a year. And as you know, anyone who's been on any expeditions realize that food, the importance of food isn't just for keeping the body together, but also the mind. Food has a huge psychological issues for us. We need food. So Heston Blumenthal and Tim together designed a menu which would sort of keep him happy in space. And I'm very happy to say that Tim actually lent me some of his. This actually has come from the ISS. So the famous one that Heston did was this. This is the bacon sandwich. If anyone followed that story, this is how are we going to make a bacon sandwich that's actually flyable, unlike John Young's corned beef sandwich. And this is what they came up with. It's a tinned bacon sandwich. I can sort of feel it rattling around in here. And also sausage sizzle, based on Tim's camping experiences that he liked to do. What else have we got here? We got Operation Raleigh. So Tim did Operation Raleigh, so here's some food based on that kind of experience. The whole idea was designing a menu that would keep Tim happy in space, remind him of home. And here we are. Actually, looking at this best before date, 3/17, it's gone out of date. So I would open it and we could have a bite, but then any lawyers in? We might do that later on. And anyway, and some stewed apple as well. So food's become very, very chefy for the obvious reasons. And there's all these kinds of tie-in. There we go. There is Tim exactly. That's with the Operation Raleigh, that particular tin right there. This is a nice one. This is Torsten Smith, who is a Danish chef. Those who are really, really into their food. How am I doing for time? Am I all right? I'm terribly worried I'm going to go over. Oh, we're okay. Torsten Smith, he's a Danish chef. Andreas Morgensen, a Danish astronaut, he designed these for his space flight. These are essentially these. These are kind of space Ferrero Rocher, which he designed. And inside, they were hollow, so the family and friends of the astronauts would write little notes, little messages of encouragement. And so when you bite into them, you would have a little note to find. It'll say, I don't know, your turn to do the dishes. I'm trying to think what I would say to my loved one if they had disappeared on Earth for 6 months. Like, yes, did you do your tax return? That kind of stuff. Anyway, for Space Ferrero Rocher. So there you go, to keep you happy in space. If anyone would like a Ferrero Rocher, I brought some along for educational purposes. Next slide is this. What to wear. This is something that's fascinated me. I was very lucky a couple of years ago. I did a program about the history of the spacesuit, looking at the sort of technical angle of the spacesuit as well as the cultural aspect of it. Of course, the spacesuit, anyone of my age who grew up watching Mr. Ben, which was a cartoon where he went to the magic costume shop and tried on lots of outfits and had that adventure. I always willed him, please put on the bloody spacesuit, and he never put on the spacesuit. I became fascinated with how spacesuits work. This is the very, very first spacesuit, if we can call it that. This is Wiley Post, American aviator, who reasoned that he could fly a lot faster, and that's what he wanted to do. He was breaking all kinds of aviation records. If he could utilize the then just discovered jet stream, he thought if he could go up to where the jet stream was, he could get that extra boost. But of course, the air is very rarefied up there, very thin, very, very low pressure. And so he developed this, a pressurized suit, a suit that you could actually inflate. The problem with inflating a suit, and this is still the problem with spacesuit design now, is if you imagined a balloon, of course, when it's uninflated, it doesn't inflate, it's just floppy. As soon as you put air in that, it becomes rigid. And so how on earth do you balance that, the inflation and the pressure that you need to keep somebody alive with the ability to be able to work? I've got a tiny bit of, how long have I got? As long as, I want to show you this little bit of film. When I was working with the company that actually made the Apollo suits that went to the moon, a company called ILC in Dover. And because we're all technicians here, I want to just share with you, I think it's one of my favorite stories of all of science, really. In fact, the people who made those suits were actually women who worked in Delaware in the garment district. So these are women who had been stitching suitcases and boxing gloves and underwear. They actually worked for Playtex, which is a company that some of you will know, who made sort of structured underwear for women. NASA kind of got all these women and stuck them making spacesuits. And I got a bit of archive footage, which is quite rare, which ILC gave me, which I want to share with you today, because I think it's really important. It says a lot about the importance of craft and the importance of technicians in the workplace, especially something as dramatic as Apollo. So let's just have a little look at this.
It is an ordinary man that will make this extraordinary journey, and ordinary men will make it possible. They're making him a suit for strolling out on the moon, something special. Cut not from fine woolens, but from the best grade aluminum. The latest style in neoprene rubber, elastic web, plastic tubing, nylon, cheesecloth. 6 layers in all, with pockets extra big for picking up moonstones.
This is number 11. That's that long one. Now,
Number 11?
And
This
this
is number 11. And how,
I know, but number 11 was supposed to be, that's such a, I mean, that's what I got fooled the other day on that. But did you ever try putting these flat and around together and one's a little shorter than the other? Now, these were supposed to be the same size. Now, I haven't measured them. Just for the heck of it, let's get a hold of it. Hold that there. Yeah, but try it on this side up. What difference is it going to make? So this is flat. Yeah, but it's still got to go around in the temple. It's got to go both ways. It's got to go around. It's got to go.
And here, too, the months and years of planning, testing, experimenting, accepting this concept of design, rejecting that hypothesis. Here, too, the long labor comes down to something you can touch. Something which can be glued and sewed and taped.
After you go down a couple of inches, take this here and check back, and then you'll know whether you're too close to the edge or if you have to push out a little bit. Monday morning, we'll start right away on suit number 14.
ordinary humans who planned and built all this, and it is an ordinary human who will take the trip. And the men who test the suit know the whole catalog of names for what happens to an ordinary human if a suit leaks. Hypoxia, dysparism, irradiation, anoxia, blackout, redout, ebulism. This is a trip of 239,000 miles into space. But only 5 miles out, there's not enough air for a man to breathe.
Okay.
Only 9 miles out,
Get the zipper now.
gas bubbles form in the tissues of a man's body. Only 12 miles out, a man's very blood boils away in the low pressure of space.
All right, pressure zipper.
And it is the suit which will protect him from all of that. And so the suit is tested and retested and retested.
That's it. Now, are you comfortable? Fine.
Yeah, so next time you see that, that iconic photograph of Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon with Neil Armstrong reflected in his visor, remember the ordinary people who planned and built all that. I love that film so much because that's exactly what it's about. It's about the ordinary people who made that happen. I'm going to rush through the next bit. Yeah, if you want to take your dog to space, no problem. We got a suit for that. Cats, sure. No, so far, only one cat has gone into space. That is a cat called Felicette, 1960, can't remember. We realised that cats aren't great in space. Anyone who's tried herding cats will know that. And that's his little friend Hector. Anyway, went on a French-sounding rocket into space, 1961. Tortoises have been... I'm going to rush through some stories. Just talking about spacesuits, this is the current spacesuit. This is the spacesuit that if you are flying into space today, you will need. This is the Sokol Russian-built spacesuit. And again, for the technical amongst you, it's the most wonderful bit of design, a bit like the Soyuz rocket itself. The Soyuz spacesuit, the Sokol spacesuit, you can see Tim Peake and Yuri Malenchenko and Tim Kopra wearing here. This has been used since 1971. This is the go-to spacesuit. Of course, if you've got a spacesuit, you need a space suitcase. I brought my space suitcase, which I brought from Camden Passage for about 10 quid. About several years ago, but I'm going to show you. We're very lucky today because if I open it up, and then this will be then we'll end. I actually brought a spacesuit with me. This is a real one from the ISS. Oh, the gloves have come off. Can I borrow you for a sec? Yeah. Can I borrow? Someone want to give me a hand? I just want to show you just the genius of how a real spacesuit works. If you're just careful of those gloves there. If you hold this arm here, and hold it. If you actually, so this is a real spacesuit that's been up into space, exactly the same as the one there. It looks kind of small, it looks kind of ordinary, but the genius of it, the bit that I love, is what happens on the inside. So what I'm going to do, actually, can you support the whole thing? It's quite heavy. Got it? Yeah. Sure? Okay. So I'm just going to open these big zippers. Those of you who know the old sort of allegorical tale about American engineering and Russian engineering. Of course, the Americans spent millions designing a pen that would write upside down in space. The Russians, of course, would use a pencil. You'd never heard that before. Thank you for laughing. Okay, I'm going to open this right. Okay, so if you want to actually put this on, right. No, hang on. No. Have you got it? Because I'm going to... Okay. So, we've opened it up. How does a spacesuit work? Okay, well, you need to fill it with air, as we've discussed. Now, the way to get into a spacesuit is this. This is the pressure bladder. You would get into it just like you would get into a sleeping bag. So you crawl in there, and then you put your legs in, and then you pull the whole thing kind of over your head. But the thing is like a balloon, like my balloon here, if I filled that with air, you need to seal it somehow. And, of course, they've come up with this amazing... Because the Russians are so brilliant, they've come up with this amazing way of doing that. So what they do is they get the seam like this. Okay? You watching this? Yeah. And then they, like a concertina, they fold it just like this. And that gives you a nice seal, you'll like this, as a physicist, you'll like this, Bill. Okay, so there you have a seal. So I can now fill that with air. Here's my tube of filling with air. And that will, but how do I close that? The Russians have come up with this amazing invention for doing this. No expense spared. It's a rubber band. Just a regular old rubber band. So the rubber band goes on like that. And then you're good to go. That gets shoved in, and the whole lot then gets zipped up. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry, it's heavy. Careful of those gloves as you can return to your seat. So that's it. And of course, the genius of a rubber band is we know they work. You know, if it was being designed by Apple, oh God, it would be downloading things and they'd change it every year, and it would be an absolute nightmare. A rubber band works. A rubber band, if it breaks, you can just get yourself another one. And they don't cost anything. So rubber bands are a wonderful bit of engineering, wonderful bit of technology that still holds astronauts together. How am I doing for time? I'm worried. I might actually leave, because I realise we're running out of time. So many of these stories and more are in this wonderful book. I'm actually just going to end. I just want to read you a little bit. This is the very last bit of the book, so a bit of a spoiler warning. When I was a kid, there was an American writer who I used to love called James Thurber. James Thurber was an American humorist. He used to write for the New Yorker magazine. You might know him. He wrote a book called The Wonderful Life of Walter Mitty, which they made into a film recently. But there was a short story, a little fable, it's just a few lines long, that he wrote called The Moth and the Star. And when I was writing this book and looking at the history of space travel, I had that little story in my mind. And right up until literally 2 days before publication, I tried to get permission to actually print The Moth and the Star in the book. To no avail, it became impossible. No one knew who owned the copyrights to it. We got in touch with the New Yorker. And eventually, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got up really frustrated that I couldn't print this story, because this is how I wanted the book to end, with this wonderful story that summed so much of it up. And I did some Googling, and I eventually got hold of a company who I thought represented James Thurber's granddaughter. And I called the number at 3 o'clock in the morning, and bizarrely, because the number was in New York, someone answered, and lo and behold, it was James Thurber's granddaughter. And I explained what I was trying to do, and we had this terrible deadline, and she said, well, send the book over and I'll look at it. And I did, and 3 hours later, she said, well, we've looked at it and we love it, so please go ahead and print the story. So it's my very, very last page, and I thought I'd just quickly read it to you. It sums up a lot about I think why we go into space and why we're so interested in going to space. So I'll read you this. It's called The Moth and the Star. A young and impressionable moth once set his heart on a certain star. He told his mother about this, and she counselled him to set his heart on a bridge lamp instead. Stars aren't the thing to hang around, she said. Lamps are the thing to hang around. You get somewhere that way, said the moth's father. You don't get anywhere chasing stars. But the moth would not heed the word of either parent. Every evening at dusk, when the star came out, he would start flying towards it. And every morning at dawn, he would crawl back home, worn out with his vain endeavour. One day his father said to him, "You haven't burnt a wing in months, boy, and it looks to me as if you're never going to. All your brothers have been badly burnt flying around street lamps, and all your sisters have been terribly singed flying around house lamps. Come on now, get out of here, get yourself scorched. A big strapping moth like you without a mark on him." The moth left his father's house, but he would not fly around street lamps, and he would not fly around house lamps. He went right on trying to reach the star, which was 4 1/3 light years, or 25 trillion miles away. The moth thought it was just caught in the top branches of an elm. He never did reach the star, but he went on trying night after night. And when he was a very old moth, he began to think that he really had reached the star, and he went around saying so. And this gave him a deep and lasting pleasure, and he lived to a great old age. His parents and his brothers and his sisters had all been burnt to death when they were quite young. Moral: who flies afar from the sphere of our sorrow is here today and here tomorrow. That's the end. Anyway, I shall bid you adieu. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to come... do we have the crane? I want to see can we see the wonderful crane? Have you done the origami crane? Bring it down. Come on, quick, because I've got to get off because people have got to have lunch. Let's see if you're going to make the right stuff.
Oh, yes, of course.
What do we think? Yes? I like it. I promised you the chance to go into space, and I am a man, nothing if not a man of my word. This is the official astronaut candidate program application form from NASA, which I printed on the way on the train from Nottingham to London. That's the actual form that one would fill out. Send it off to the Johnson Space Centre and see what they say. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I shall let you go, and I have copies if people would like to buy, and I can sign later on. Go and have lunch, and I'll see you later. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.